The first time Menna saw someone vanish in the Temple of Hathor, she convinced herself it was a trick of the light. The second time she knew better. The third time she started keeping records. It happened during the midnight offering, when the temple's vast chambers were illuminated only by flickering oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed millennia of secrets. The air was thick with incense, frankincense and myrrh mixing with the ever-present desert dust that seemed to seep through the very stones themselves. Menna watched as Priestess Kia stepped too close to the peculiar carving, the one depicting the massive bulb-like structure that had fascinated scholars for generations. One moment Kia was there, reaching out to brush away centuries of dust, her fingers just grazing the ancient stone, and the next, nothing. Just the lingering scent of lotus blossoms and ozone, and a strange ripple in the air as if reality itself had hiccuped. The disappearance should have caused chaos, panic searches. Instead, what disturbed Menna most was how quickly everyone forgot. Within days it was as if Kia had never existed. When Menna mentioned her name, others gave her blank looks or quickly changed the subject. Only in the temple archives did any trace remain. A single line in a logbook, written in Kia's distinctive hand, ending mid-sentence. No one spoke of the disappearances officially. Not the high priests who sealed off the inner sanctum with heavy wooden doors bound in bronze, nor the temple guards who now refused night duty with a fear they couldn't explain. But Menna kept count. 3 priestesses, 2 scribes and a visiting merchant in the past month alone. Each vanishing under the same circumstances. Always near the bulb carving, always at night, always leaving behind that peculiar scent of lotus and lightning. "You're being ridiculous," her fellow acolyte Tao told her when she tried to discuss her theories. "They've simply been reassigned to other temples." But Menna noticed how he avoided walking near that section of the temple, how his eyes darted away from the strange hieroglyphs that surrounded the bulb carving. She also noticed how his hands trembled when he performed the evening rituals, and how he'd taken to wearing protective amulets, far more than tradition required. During her studies, Menna discovered that the disappearances followed a pattern more precise than she'd initially realized. They occurred only when the moon was exactly half full and always precisely at midnight. The timing wasn't just regular. It was mathematical, astronomical. The vanishings aligned perfectly with certain star positions that, according to the temple's ancient charts, shouldn't have been possible in the current age. More disturbing were the ancient texts she found hidden in a forgotten alcove, speaking of the Great Illumination and those who walk between worlds. The scrolls were written in a dialect of Egyptian she'd never encountered before, with symbols that seemed to change meaning depending on the angle from which they were viewed. The temple's archives held scrolls dating back thousands of years, and Menna spent countless hours translating them in secret. One particular passage haunted her. "The light of Dendera opens the door, but not all who pass through return as themselves. The gods gifted us their power, yet even they fear what lies beyond the veil. Those who seek illumination must be prepared for darkness." As she delved deeper into the mystery, strange things began to happen in her own life. She would find her carefully organized notes rearranged overnight, forming patterns that made no sense until viewed in moonlight, star charts and mathematical equations that shouldn't have been possible with her limited knowledge. The hieroglyphs near the bulb carving seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them, telling different stories each time she managed to translate them. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night, she heard voices speaking in languages that had died millennia ago. They whispered of possibilities, of paths between worlds, of a universe far more complex than anyone had imagined. The voices grew stronger with each disappearance, as if every vanishing thinned the barrier between what was and what could be. The high priest, Amenhotep, caught her one evening as she attempted to document the changing symbols. She expected punishment, perhaps even expulsion from the temple. Instead he simply said, "Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, child." His eyes held a knowing look as if he'd walked this path before. The next morning he too was gone, leaving behind only a faint trace of that now familiar scent. But it was what Menna found in Amenhotep's quarters that changed everything. Hidden beneath a loose stone was a small crystal, warm to the touch and thrumming with an inner light that pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. Wrapped around it was a papyrus note in his handwriting. The key exists in 3 places: the light above, the crystal below, and the space between thoughts. When the alignment comes, remember, what seems like an ending is merely a beginning. The paths are infinite, but the truth is singular. The crystal seemed to respond to her touch, growing warmer when she faced certain directions, humming at different frequencies as she moved through the temple. It took her weeks to understand the pattern, correlating astronomical charts with the temple's architectural layout. The bulb carving, she realized, wasn't just decoration, it was a map. The temple itself was built to channel something, its very foundations aligned with star patterns that only existed in the deep past, or perhaps the distant future. The revelations came faster after that. She discovered that the temple's dimensions corresponded exactly to mathematical ratios found in nature: the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of leaves on a stem. But these weren't just any ratios. They were equations describing the movement between spaces, the mathematical poetry of reality itself. Other priests began to notice her research, but their reactions were strange. Some would engage her in detailed discussions about her findings, only to seem completely unaware of the conversation the next day. Others would watch her from corners with eyes that sometimes appeared to reflect light differently than they should, as if seeing her from multiple angles simultaneously. On the night of the next half-moon, Menna stood before the carving, Amenhotep's crystal clutched in her hand. As midnight approached, the air grew thick with possibility. The crystal pulsed in sync with her heartbeat, and the bulb carving began to emit a soft, impossible glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But what happened next was not what anyone could have expected. The light didn't just illuminate, it revealed. The walls of the temple became transparent, showing layers upon layers of reality stacked like sheets of papyrus. In one layer, ancient Egypt still thrived, its golden age never ending. In another, beings of pure energy conducted rituals that hurt her eyes to witness, their forms shifting between states of matter she had no words to describe. And there, in the spaces between these realities, Menna saw them all, every person who had vanished from the temple. They weren't gone, they were everywhere at once, existing in multiple states of being. Kia smiled at her from a reality where the temple was underwater, while in another she danced through the air as a being of pure light. Amenhotep nodded to her from a dozen different versions of reality, his form flickering between human and something far more complex. His knowledge expanded beyond what any mortal mind was meant to contain. The crystal in her hand grew brighter, offering her a choice: step through and join them in their infinite existence, or stay and protect the secret of what the Temple of Hathor truly was, not just a place of worship, but a nexus point where multiple realities converged, where the gods themselves had learned that truth was not a single path but an infinite array of possibilities. Menna made her decision. The next morning, when the temple servants came to clean the inner sanctum, they found it exactly as it had always been. The bulb carving watched over them silently, its secrets intact. If they noticed that the hieroglyphs now showed a young priestess in multiple places at once, they didn't mention it. If they saw how the shadows sometimes moved against the light, or how certain angles of the temple seemed to contain more space than they should, they kept it to themselves. And if sometimes, on nights when the moon is exactly half full, visitors to the temple catch glimpses of a figure moving through solid walls, or hear whispered conversations in impossible languages, they know better than to speak of it. For in Dendera, some lights are best left undisturbed, and some mysteries are meant to remain exactly that, mysteries. Years later, archaeologists would debate the meaning of the Dendera Light carving, never suspecting that their answers lay not in the past or future, but in the spaces between moments, where a young priestess named Menna still walks, guarding a secret that exists in all times at once. They would argue about ancient electricity, about symbolic representations, about religious metaphors, never knowing that the truth was far stranger than any theory they could propose. And sometimes, if you stand in just the right spot at just the right moment, you might feel a warm crystal pressed into your palm, and hear a whispered voice asking, "Are you ready to see?" But be careful how you answer. In Dendera, some questions change you forever and some lights never stop revealing new truths. For the mystery of the Dendera Light isn't just about ancient power or forgotten technology. It's about the nature of reality itself, and the infinite possibilities that exist in the spaces between what we think we know and what actually is. They say that in the Temple of Hathor, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear Menna's footsteps echoing through time, guarding the boundaries between worlds, keeping watch over a secret that's both infinitely complex and beautifully simple. That sometimes the greatest mysteries are not those we solve, but those we choose to become part of.